Hello and welcome back to the Death Row and Executions channel. My name is Paco Rivera and I do presentations on an execution happening soon, including a story on what got the death row inmate sentenced to death. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. Also check out my other channel, The Maximum Sentence, where I cover recent crimes and convictions. There will be a link for that also. There are two executions scheduled for May 14th of this year. One is Raymond Eugene Johnson in Oklahoma, the case that I will be talking about today. The other execution scheduled for May 14th is Edward Lee Busby Jr. in Texas. A presentation on that case should appear on this channel next week. As with most cases I cover about an upcoming execution, this one is especially tragic because there was an infant involved whose life was also taken along with her mother by a violent, evil monster. In June of 2007, Johnson had brutally beaten Brooke Whitaker with a hammer, a woman he had gotten into a relationship with after he was released from prison in 2005. But that relationship had ended because Johnson was abusive, had stalked her, and had even threatened to kill her on a number of occasions. Brooke, who by 2007 and was the mother of 4 children, had even filed a restraining order against Johnson, but that restraining order was dropped when Brooke and Raymond Johnson both failed to appear for a court hearing. That day in June of 2007, when Johnson had assaulted his ex-girlfriend, he had also set the house on fire, and Brooke's youngest child, Kaya, who was only 7 months old, died when she was burned to death in the house. Now, Brooke and Johnson's relationship had ended before Brooke became pregnant with Kaya. So Johnson was not the father of that baby. The father was a man named Antoine Muse. We'll get a little more into everything that happened on that June day in 2007 a bit later. But you should know that this was not the first time that Raymond Johnson had murdered someone. 17 years earlier, in 1995, Johnson, who was 21 years old at the time, was with a friend or an acquaintance, a man named Clarence Ray Oliver, who was 25 years old. They had been together in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, where Johnson was living. Apparently, both men began arguing with each other. After Johnson pulled out a gun, Clarence got in his car and started to drive away. As the car drove away, Johnson shot through the passenger side window at Clarence. The car crashed into a ditch and Clarence died. Johnson pleaded guilty to manslaughter and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. But he was released on parole 10 years later in 2005. And it was soon after he was released from prison in 2005 that Johnson relocated from Oklahoma City to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and once there he met 22-year-old Brooke Lauren Whitaker, and they began dating. Brooke was born on April 13th, 1983 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She grew up in the Sand Springs and Tulsa region. According to her obituary, Brooke enjoyed shopping, life in general, and being with her family. By 2005, Brooke had 3 children, 2 daughters, Logan Marie Kleck and Alyssa Page Kleck, and 1 son, Riley Alexander Matthews. By 2007, when Brooke was killed, by this time she was 24 years old, she would have another child, a daughter she named Kaya Jade Whitaker, born on November 21st, 2006, who was also killed. From reports, it appears that the relationship between Brooke and the father, Antoine Muse, was very short-lived. Kaya was just learning how to stand up on her own, and she was, according to family a very happy baby, always full of smiles. As I mentioned earlier, Brooke began dating Johnson shortly after he was released from prison for murder. Now, according to Brooke's family, whom were interviewed by various media sources, Johnson never told Brooke that he was in prison, and he never told her that he had murdered someone, and she didn't know that he was on parole. Okay, so here is where I will pause for a moment to offer a bit of advice to all the women out there, and the men too. Before you accept dating someone, do a background check on the person. The person doesn't have to know you did that. It's something you should do as a precaution. With the internet these days, doing that research on someone is very simple. Now, yes, I have heard all the stories about, well, the person has served his time or her time, and everyone deserves a second chance. But I can tell you that very few criminals are fully rehabilitated. That percentage is very small. So if you decide to date the person anyway, that's up to you. But do your research before deciding. We basically have here yet another case of domestic violence that ended in 2 deaths. Even though it has been referred to as a domestic situation, Brooke and Johnson had already been separated for a short period of time. According to the family, Johnson was extremely jealous and very abusive. He had beaten Brooke and choked her while they were dating. And when she'd had enough and finally got herself out of the relationship, Johnson was threatening her life and stalking her. One can only imagine his fury when she became pregnant from another man and gave birth in November of 2006, 7 months before she was killed. But, as too many women will often do, shortly after she gave birth, Brooke allowed Johnson to move back in with her in early 2007. However, things got so bad again that in April of 2007, with the baby now 5 months old, Brooke filed for a restraining order. And it appears that Johnson honored for a few months the restrictions of the restraining order, not being allowed to go near Brooke or contact her in any way. He was already on parole, and he knew that violating that restraining order would also mean violating his parole, sending him back to prison for the remaining years of his 20-year sentence. But a court hearing was scheduled to maintain the restraining order a month after Brooke had filed for it, and both Raymond Johnson and Brooke were required to appear at that court hearing. Well, as I said earlier, as it turns out, both failed to appear. And because neither had shown up at that hearing, the restraining order against Johnson was dropped. And the reason why both did not appear at that court hearing is because by that time, Brooke had allowed Johnson to move back in with her again. And he remained living there until June of that year because Johnson had met another woman, a woman named Jennifer Walton, who he had been seeing for some time and who was now pregnant with his child. Jennifer lived in Coweta, Oklahoma, about 25 miles from Tulsa. But Johnson didn't move in with Jennifer. He moved into a homeless shelter for a while and had also spent some time at the home of a lady friend of his now girlfriend, Jennifer Walton. Now, according to Jennifer, on November 22nd, 2007, this is one day before the murders, Jennifer said that she had picked up Johnson and drove him to Brooke's home late in the evening, sometime close to midnight, because he wanted to gather up and pack his clothing and his personal items that were still in the house. Apparently, that would take a while, so Jennifer left him there and drove away. There was nobody home when Johnson went in. Brooke had already left to work her all-night shift. Thankfully, Brooke's 3 older children were not at home that day or the next. It appears from the reports that Brooke had left the baby, Kaya, with someone to take care of her while Brooke was at work, and Brooke would pick her up the following morning when she got off work on her way home. When Brooke arrived home that morning, Johnson was still there. Brooke would lay the baby down in one of the rooms. Johnson would later tell his girlfriend, Jennifer, that he and Brooke got into a very heated argument and that at one point Brooke picked up a knife and threatened to stab him. Yeah, they always have a story, don't they? Anyway, Johnson said that he picked up a hammer and in self-defense, he struck Brooke so hard that it crushed her skull. So she picks up a knife and he has readily available a hammer that he was able to grab. Johnson would say that Brooke was begging for him to call 911, but he refused. According to him, he did not want to go back to prison. So he hit Brooke about 5 more times in the head, and then he went outside to the shed and got a container of gasoline and poured it on her and then set her and the house on fire. Johnson then called his girlfriend Jennifer and asked her to come pick him up. While they were driving away, Johnson said that he needed to go back to the house and search outside where he thinks he dropped Brooke's cell phone because he had used it to call her. So Jennifer took him back, but he couldn't find the cell phone. Jennifer would later tell police that she saw smoke coming out from one of the windows. After that, they both went to her home in the town of Coweta. 911 dispatchers were alerted by at least one caller reporting a house on fire, and when firefighters arrived about 11 o'clock that morning and put out the fire, they found Brooke still barely alive, and she was transported to Hillcrest Medical Center in Tulsa, where she died a short time later. The autopsy determined that she had died from a combination of blunt force trauma to the head and smoke inhalation. The baby, strangely, was found on the floor, wedged underneath some bunk beds. We know Brooke would not have put her there, so it seems Johnson had placed the baby there. Whether Johnson had placed her there to protect her from the fire or to get her closer to the fire is unknown. But Kaya's body was found burned regardless and had died in the house. Investigators did find Brooke's cell phone and saw that 2 phone calls were placed a bit earlier to a woman named Jennifer Walton, so they went to see Jennifer. Raymond Johnson was not there at the time, and Jennifer quickly told them everything she knew, and she led investigators to a garbage dumpster near her home where they recovered a garbage bag containing bloody clothing, a claw hammer, and Brooke's wallet. Surveillance was in place near Jennifer's home waiting for Johnson to return, and when he did, he was arrested. With all the evidence piled up against him, Johnson confessed to what he had done. The trial for Raymond Eugene Johnson began about 2 years later, in June of 2009, and prosecutors announced that they would seek the death penalty against him. Johnson was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death twice, once for Brooke and once for baby Kaya. And he received a sentence of life in prison for arson. And as I said earlier, he is set to die on May 14th of this year in Oklahoma. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button for more of these death row and upcoming execution stories so that you're alerted when the next one comes out. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more death row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. My name is Paco Rivera. Thank you for watching. Take care and bye for now.